embrace and ride the wave of love you'll find beneath the fake disguise. Just search for balance in life. Just search for balance in life. Just search for balance in life. Put away with violence in life. Celebrate your talents in life. Inside that strength from inside. Learn on with intent. Just strive. Lead now intent to provide our world with grace and pride. The wave of love you'll find beneath that fake disguise. Just search for balance in life. Just search for balance in life. Just search for balance in life. Celebrate your talents in life.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. While we go ahead and get started, please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat if you haven't already, because I just enabled the chat. Thank you so much for your patience with me as I learn how to use Zoom. And I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Adri Perez. My pronouns are they, them, and I work as a policy and advocacy strategist for LGBTQIA equality for the ACLU of Texas. So at the ACLU of Texas, our mission is to protect, defend, and expand the full exercise of freedom and rights for all people, particularly those that have been historically and intentionally denied those rights. But here in Texas, when it comes to LGBTQIA plus rights, we definitely do not do that work alone. And with us tonight are some of our partners also fighting the good fight in Texas. So joining us today, we have staff from Equality Texas, staff from Texas Freedom Network, staff from Human Rights Campaign, Lambda Legal, and unfortunately tonight, Kent could not be with us, but they are still a core coalition partner, and you should check out their work. So some FAQs. Dominique is also joining us from the ACLU of Texas and is here to help with any tech needs that you might have, and I'll be around as well as anything if anything else comes up, such as the chat being disabled while we're asking you to introduce yourselves in it. As far as questions go, that was a very effective way to communicate with me. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please use the questions feature that is built into the Zoom to ask, but please refrain from disclosing too much personal information as we want to be sure to protect people's privacy as best as possible. We can see your names and I can find contact information for you. So if you have a question with personal information in it, we can follow up with you after this webinar. But if you want to be proactive in reaching out to us, you can ask your specific questions by reaching out to Lambda Legal's help desk or to the ACLU of Texas legal intake for more help. So one of our goals during this webinar today is to leave you all with resources, and let's just go over the resources. And then we're going to do org introductions for everybody who's joining us today. We're going to cover mental health insights and resources with Dr. Megan Mooney. We're going to do a Know Your Rights for DFPS and gender affirming care, a Know Your Rights for LGBTQIA students' rights in schools. And it's on there 2 times, so sorry. We're going to do calls to action, questions, and a resource recap and close. As with all good webinars, there is a typo on the first slide. Some of the resources that we have for you today, one that we developed in collaboration with trans kids and their parents and all of the organizations joining us today for this webinar is texastranskids.org. One of the newer resources that we have developed at the ACLU of Texas is our Student Rights Hub. And Dominique is going to go ahead and be dropping links to those as I list them off. a resource that has been invaluably helpful to us this year with the attacks that we faced from our Texas government has been Lambda Legal's help desk and helpline. A resource that Human Rights Campaign has been working on for a very long time now is the Welcoming Schools Kit. And I will let our partners talk more about those when they introduce themselves if they'd like. Equality Texas has developed a new link to request for support. And they have a mental health toolkit coming up soon. And if you or somebody you love needs resources for name and gender marker correction clinics, there's one coming up tomorrow, and you can message us to receive the link for that, specifically me or Gilly from Lambda Legal. And there's also another one coming up in October, so don't feel too stressed if you don't have what you need to do it tomorrow. If all of our partners could go ahead and join us to introduce themselves to our partners, we're going to go ahead and share your name, your pronouns, your title, and where you're located and what you do for the organization that you work with. We're going to get started with Chloe.
Hi, y'all. I'm Chloe Goodman. My pronouns are they, them. I work for Equality Texas. I'm the constituent services manager, but I like to think of myself as just a social worker on staff. Basically, I coordinate our team to help LGBTQ plus individuals and their loved ones across Texas. And so part of that work has been developing this request for support link that Audrey mentioned. If you're coming up against issues with like your school administration or any institution that is failing to respect either your LGBTQ self or your kiddo, go ahead and let us know and we'll do everything in our power to help you out there. And we also have the mental health toolkit that we've been developing coming soon. And that's specifically for parents and caretakers of trans youth, not just in Texas, but anywhere, and how to support their mental health.
Hello, y'all. Hello, y'all. My name is Emerald. I use she, her pronouns. I am the organizing strategist for Texas Freedom Network, and I am located in San Antonio. And thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you, Emerald and Chloe. Next up, we have Preston.
Hey y'all, my name is Preston Knight. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Texas field organizer for the Human Rights Campaign. I'll drop my contact info in the chat if any questions come up, and I look forward to helping y'all out a little bit.
Awesome. So I'm Nicholas Gellery. Folks just call me Gilly. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a Tyrone Garner Legal Fellow at Lambda Legal, a national organization committed to achieving full recognition of the civil rights of lesbians, gay men, bisexual, transgender people, and everyone living with HIV. I work out of our Dallas office, but I reside in Austin. I'm a part of many different cases, including the Texas cases that you'll hear about today.
Thank you, Gilly. Brian?
Hey, I'm Brian Klosterbor, he, him, his. I'm an attorney with the ACLU of Texas. I'm based in Houston. Good to be with y'all tonight.
Dominique, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dominique. I work for the ACLU of Texas. I am in El Paso, Texas, born and raised. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
And last but not least is going to be Dr. Megan Mooney, who's going to get us started by talking about mental health.
Thanks, Audrey. Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Mooney. Pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a licensed psychologist in Houston, and I specialize in working with children and families, and predominantly for LGBTQ plus youth and or other young people and families who've experienced a variety of traumatic experiences. I am also one of the plaintiffs in one of the lawsuits currently going on. So happy to partner with our legal colleagues here in helping to protect the rights of our kids and families here in Texas. So glad to be here with you all today. as I said, I'm a trauma specialist. So unfortunately, that brings me to also then specialize in working with LGBTQ plus youth who are disproportionately impacted by all forms of trauma compared to their cisgendered heterosexual peers. And one of the things that we know is that right now, all of us here in Texas are living in a pretty high stress time. Our kids and families are facing daily stressors and daily traumas. And so I'm coming to you through that lens today with some ideas to hopefully kind of help you support the young people in your lives. And so coming through a lens of knowing that there are things that we can do to help protect ourselves and protect young people in the face of high stress environments and potentially traumatic experiences. So I'm going to hopefully give you some actionable steps to take. So first and foremost, when we're talking about times of a lot of stress and potential trauma, is we want to focus on safety. And safety means different things to every person. And so I can't define what safety is like for you and your family, but it's important to have that conversation with the adults and caregivers in the family and with your young people, and figure out what does safety look like to us, and how do we help ensure a sense of both physical and psychological safety in what are really uncertain and scary times. So thinking about, a couple of easy tasks, and I say easy, and you can decide how easy this is or isn't for yourself, but trying to minimize contact with distressing content right now, especially media content, social media content. There's a lot of news stories out there about children and families potentially facing harm, facing DFPS investigations and whatnot. And so thinking about how do we filter that for ourselves so that we are not focused on those negative messages and words from people that are hurtful, that are kind of out in the media. How do we focus on more positive messages and images and portrayals of families of LGBTQ plus young people? So that's one thing, is just focusing on what does safety look like in our home and outside of our home. So how do we know what our rights are outside of our home? And we're all going to get to hear a lot about that this evening, and making sure that our young people know what their rights are to keep them safe when they are outside of our homes. The next thing we want to do is focus on a sense of calming, right? So everything is very stressful right now. So making sure that we are doing things actively and intentionally to help ourselves feel calmer, both again in home or when we're out in community. So focusing on who are our helpers, how do we reach out to our helpers when we need some extra support? How do we focus on positive things that we have? So whether that's personal strengths, family strengths, good things about our families that we can rely on, to know that we can rely on each other when we're feeling really stressed and overwhelmed. So doing things like practicing relaxation skills, practicing skills to calm down in the evenings before bedtimes. There's lots of different ways and that calming looks to different families. So I can't define that for you, but again, focusing on intentionally adding in calming activities to your own routines as caregivers and for your young people that you care for. One of our most valuable tools to focus on in times of high stress is a sense of connection and connectedness to others. So really emphasizing, valuing, increasing positive, healthy connections to others. So thinking about who is in your circle of support, who's in your actual connected biological family or your chosen family that are safe supports for you and your young ones right now. And how do we intentionally add time in with those people right now that we know that bring good things to us. And then how do we connect with other families right now who might also be feeling the similar stressors so that we can be support for each other. For those of us who are professionals, it's also finding the other professionals who are in this work so that we find connection as well to support us, and also, kind of continuing the work and continuing to support families. But, for those of you who are families, like looking in your community, where are those resources and community to find other families to rely on and to lean on for positive, healthy social connections. We also want to focus on the sense of efficacy. So things that are in our control, things that we can actually do, because part of what we know is in times like this, it feels really helpless, right? There's a lot happening around us that feels kind of hopeless and helpless and like it's out of our control. But an important part is to recognize there are things we can be doing. There's specific actions we can be taking to protect ourselves and protect the young people that we care about. So you're going to get lots of tools and resources tonight from my colleagues. I will also be gaining some of these tools and resources, but know how you can safely be involved, whether it's in advocacy efforts, in legislative or policy action items, in community events, whatever it is, but there are things you can do. And by taking actions, you'll feel better and in control of something in your life, right? When everything else is kind of feeling out of control. It's also important for kids to know what can they do, what's in their power to do, whether it's with regard to advocacy actions, learning more about their rights, finding new connections to other young people, whatever that might be. But for the caregivers listening, helping your young people figure out what are tangible action items that they can take to feel better and feel in control right now. And then lastly, it's really important for us to focus on a sense of hope right now. One of the things that I, come this evening to you with is a sense of hopefulness that we are here in community together with amazing legal and advocacy professionals who are here to support all of us. And that should give us all a sense of hope, and not just the people who are here tonight, but we all need to hold on to remember that there are hundreds, if not thousands of people across the state of Texas and around the country who are working actively to help protect the rights and safety and well-being of all the young people that we care so much about. It's hard because sometimes the voices are really loud from the side, bringing on really hurtful messages. But as the adults who are surrounding young people who feel really scared right now, it's very important for us to instill that sense of hope. There are lots of people and organizations out there fighting to protect us all. And so keep that in mind. Keep in mind that there are good things happening at federal levels and even in small wins and big wins, legal cases around the country that are happening to protect us all, and keeping that in mind even when the bad news is present. So I hope that these few action items are helpful for you all this evening. I will also add my contact information to the chat so people can reach out to me afterwards as needed. I wish you all a good evening, and I hope that the rest of the resources here are helpful for you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. So next up, Gilly from Lambda Legal is going to talk about DFPS and gender affirming care.
Thank you for the intro. So as you all know, there's been attempts nationwide, not just in Texas, to restrict access to gender affirming care for trans youth. I'll of course be giving an update on what's happening here in Texas, but I wanted to briefly let you all know about a recent win in federal court on this front. So in May of 2021, the ACLU sued, challenging an Arkansas law that sought to ban access to gender affirming care for trans youth. Shortly thereafter, the district court issued an injunction blocking the law from going into effect while the case went forward. That went on appeal. And then just recently, on August 25th, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld that injunction while the case proceeded to trial in October of this year. This is a really great win. The 8th Circuit made clear that the state's ban on care didn't advance any important government interest, and that the state's defense of the law was inadequate. This kind of leads us into what's happening here in Texas. So as you all, again, may know, of course, that in February, the Attorney General issued an opinion equating gender affirming care as child abuse. The very next day, Governor Abbott issued a directive to the FPS to implement and enforce that order. He also directed mandatory reporters, which here in Texas are most folks, to report families for providing gender affirming care. Shortly thereafter, DFPS began investigations. This leads us to our two recent cases that we filed. So Lambda Legal, the ACLU of Texas, and the ACLU, as well as our law firm partner, Baker Botts, filed two cases earlier this year to prevent DFPS from implementing a new rule that expands the definition of child abuse to treat gender affirming care as child abuse and investigate families. In our first case, Doe v. Abbott, we represent one family and Dr. Mooney. In the second case, PFLAG versus Abbott, we represent 3 families and PFLAG. In both cases, the trial court issued a temporary injunction preventing DFPS from investigating plaintiff families while both cases go forward. Both cases are currently on appeal, where the state is challenging the trial court's temporary injunction. We have not yet heard from the appellate court whether or not they believe the temporary injunction was proper, but as of now, they do still stand. We are still waiting to hear from the lower court whether or not DFPS will be prevented from investigating PFLAG member families in general during the course of litigation. So as of now, just the individual families in these orders are prevented from being investigated. Depending on how the appeal process works out, there could be a trial next spring. Let's see. So what do families kind of need to know now? So since the injunctions are only on behalf of individual families, since the trial court has not decided whether or not they want to prevent DFPS from investigating PFLAG families in general, DFPS still has the choice to continue investigations into families. As many of you do know, there was a recent report of one family, of DFPS opening a new investigation on behalf of one family. So what can families do to be prepared? First and foremost, join PFLAG, a national or a local chapter. Secondly, please contact Lambda Legal's help desk if you are contacted by DFPS. And you can even do that proactively if you want to get connected with the local attorney in advance of being contacted by DFPS. When you are contacted by DFPS, you do want to indicate that you would like to confer with an attorney, whether or not you have one yet or you intend to get one. You do not have to sign any type of medical release, and you don't have to volunteer any information regarding medical care. And then in regards to youth and their rights in schools, as you know, of the most recent case that has been in the news, the child was taken out of school to be interviewed by a DFPS employee. Youth actually have the right to decline to be interviewed. There are some amazing resources that Tent and Tilldale have provided that kind of say exactly what youth and families can say and do when they're approached by DFPS. And then lastly, for updates, feel free to follow Lambda Legal or the ACLU of Texas. And then in addition to that, there's a legal update section on texastranscig.org that will provide some very up-to-date info as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilly. Up next, Brian is going to be talking about students' rights.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to spotlight your video and then get off video and let you go.
Yeah, thank you, Gilly. And yeah, just to emphasize from what Gilly was saying, this unfortunately, it's really cruel and heartless that DFPS is still even pursuing any of these investigations. We know that these just looming over families is incredibly harmful. But as Gilly said, we do have a lot of defenses in place and resources to support you. And in this moment, we've seen an outpouring of support for Texas youth coming from all across the country. Lots of attorneys have been volunteering, mental health professionals have been volunteering. And so there are defenses in place. But the fact that the threat is still out there, we are working as hard as we can to stop it permanently. Go ahead to the next slide. And talking about students and schools, I think it's really important to view all of the attacks that are coming against the trans community as that we're currently in a moment of backlash. We have seen tremendous gains and strides coming from the Supreme Court as well as courts across the country. Dating back to 2015, when the U.S. Supreme Court found that marriage equality was the law of the land. Pictured here on the left is a picture of Amy Stevens. She's a trans woman from Michigan. She came out to her boss at a Christian funeral home and wrote a beautiful letter describing how she really had decided to come to work as her true and authentic self. Unfortunately, she passed away just weeks before the US Supreme Court decided her case in Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. And it was a really profound and also surprising win. A lot of the anti-LGBT groups had really been pushing those cases up to the US Supreme Court. And it was really a surprise victory for us, for Amy, and for the entire LGBT community. The Supreme Court found in a 6-3 ruling that sex discrimination under Title VII, which is the federal non-discrimination law for employment, which applies to any business in the country with more than 25 employees, that LGBTQ people are protected and that you cannot discriminate against someone based on gender identity or sexual orientation without taking into account their sex. And so this law from the 1960s, with Justice Gorsuch, a Trump-appointed judge, writing the majority opinion, saying that actually transgender people have been protected all along, that the law protects transgender Americans. It was a huge blow to the Alliance Defending Freedom and other anti-LGBT groups. And here on the right is a picture of Gavin Grimm, and he is one of nearly a dozen transgender young people that have been winning court case after court case all across the country. Title VII is considered a building block of non-discrimination law, and courts often look to Title VII to interpret what sex discrimination means in Title IX for the school context, in the Affordable Care Act, the Fair Housing Act, and dozens of state laws and federal laws across the country. So we can go to the next slide. And so we see that, trans people have been winning all of these cases and also living as their true and authentic selves, making changes both at the national level and also at the very local level. A lot of our work at the ACLU of Texas has been representing transgender and non-binary students in schools. And we're seeing in school districts, from the largest districts in our state to the tiniest of towns, people being themselves and their friends, their teachers, parents being supportive. Unfortunately, we also know that is scary to some of these anti-LGBT groups, and they're trying to bring us backwards. So as we've won all of these court cases, we see a huge uptick now in anti-transgender legislation. They have lost a lot in the courts, and they've turned now to the state legislatures, and they're really they've been trying to split the LGBTQ community. As polling on marriage equality, improves, and many people now accept that as the law of the land, they're looking for any way to try to cling to their own views and their own political and religious beliefs they want to impose on society. But I don't know, this is kind of small for you all to see, but if you see the chart on the left, just shows the number of anti-trans bills increasing year after year proposed by legislatures. And the darker shaded portion is the bills targeting young people. They're trying to target a population that is not yet over the age of 18 and that often can't advocate for themselves. Of course, we see a lot of youth advocating, but it is harder, the younger you are, and especially if you don't have a supportive family, to be able to have any political power. You can't even vote yet. But on the right, we also see a graphic of the total number of anti-LGBT bills, and the darker shaded portion is anti-trans bills, which is still the vast majority. But here in 2022, in the last column, we also see a spike in general anti-LGBT bills, which really shows that the attack on trans people has been political all along, as an attack against the entire LGBTQ community. The goal is not just to exclude and erase trans people from public life, which of course is one of their goals, but also to roll back all of the rights for the entire community. So go ahead into the next slide. So one of the really big areas that trans people have won in recent years is defeating the really outdated anti-transgender arguments that we had here in Texas back in 2017. Dan Patrick and others tried to use bathrooms as a wedge issue and as a way to attack trans Texans. They lost that fight. They lost that fight in North Carolina when they tried it there. Gavin Grimm won his court case. Many other students have also won their court cases to be able to use the bathroom that aligns with who they are. We have seen now hundreds of school districts across Texas simply allowing students to be themselves, to use public spaces, and we haven't seen a single report of any incident coming from that. And so we've made a lot of progress there. Unfortunately, we don't yet have any court case here in Texas that's totally binding. The US Supreme Court has not weighed in on whether trans people have an affirmative right to use the public restroom, but 5 courts of appeals across the country have found that they have this right. And we're seeing that most school districts are letting students use the restroom that aligns with who they are. Of course, the argument is even stronger for students who have been able to update their birth certificate and to get a court order updating their name and gender marker. And that's why we do encourage you to if your child is ready and able, to seek the help of the Legal Aid Clinic of Texas and to go ahead and get your students' records updated. Next slide. Unfortunately, the one piece of legislation that passed here in Texas last year was banning transgender students from playing sports. There were over 45 bills that were introduced targeting and attacking LGBT people's rights, the majority of which targeted and attacked trans youth. We defeated collectively with all the groups on this Zoom, as well as with many of you, all of those bills, unfortunately, except for one. House Bill 25 was enacted into law. It's a really cruel and senseless bill. Texas already had some of the most restrictive rules in the country regarding trans students' ability to participate in sports, but they tried to make it even worse. The law as written is very vague and confusing. The law also says that UIL shall implement rules about how the law will be enforced or interpreted. We've learned recently that UIL has not implemented any rules. All they did was they updated their non-discrimination policy, which is particularly cruel, that they would actually put this in the non-discrimination section. And they say that gender will be interpreted based on the law that passed, section 33.0834. So that's all they did. It's very circular because the law itself says that UIL has to issue rules about what the law means. The law itself is very confusing because the law says that students shall play sports based on the sex as correctly stated on their birth certificate at or near the time of birth. But that also, there's also a way that says that the sex can be different based on a clerical or scrivener's error, but none of those terms are defined. Now, UIL has completely punted this issue and saying it's now up to local school districts to interpret and enforce HB 25. So as of today, we do know of some school districts that are allowing trans students to keep playing sports if their birth certificate has been updated. But we also know of districts that are trying to kick students off of sports teams. And of course, we also know of a lot of students who have simply, unfortunately, given up and decided not to play sports because they don't want to deal with this nightmare that's been imposed on them by the Texas legislature. We also know of trans students, like on the bottom in the top right corner, the bottom is Mac Beggs, who won the state championship in girls wrestling, even though he's a transgender boy. And on the top right is Eli, who also has been was forced to wrestle with the girls teams, even though he's a trans boy. And we also know on the top left is a picture of Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood, who are 2 athletes from Connecticut, who are really the ones who have been targeted the most by ADF and other groups, because not only are they successful athletes, they're successful Black trans athletes. And we know that these bills are really rooted in racism and also rooted as a way to try to attack the transgender community. Next slide. One area that we have made a lot of progress on is dress and grooming. For decades, many Texas school districts had different dress codes for boys and for girls, and really no understanding that there are also non-binary students as well. Thankfully, in recent years, there have been several lawsuits, and people like on the left here is Trevor Wilkinson, who went on national news after he was suspended by his school in Clyde ISD in West Texas, just for decorating his nails. His school had a rule that boys were not allowed to paint their nails, but girls could. And on the right here is a picture of one of our clients in Magnolia ISD, who's a non-binary student who was sent home and suspended simply for wearing long hair. We have seen hundreds of school districts in the recent years changing their dress and grooming codes to be gender neutral. And now it's, unfortunately, there are some districts that still have gender-based rules. But if you see any of these, know that that's now the minority, and that there are several pending lawsuits that have all found in favor of students' right to be able to dress and groom themselves how they want to. Next slide. Names and pronouns is also an area where there has been a ton of progress. Unfortunately, this is also an area of some backlash right now. The Texas Association of School Boards, TASB, which will show you their guidance at the end, is very clear that every student has a right to be called by their affirming name and pronouns. Courts across the country have also found that it is gender-based harassment to deliberately and intentionally misgender someone or call them by the wrong name. Unfortunately, this is an area that some judges in the Fifth Circuit, our Court of Appeals, have picked up on, as well as anti-LGBT groups are really trying to politicize pronouns when it's really an issue of basic common human respect and dignity. And so it is an area that we're going to see more pushback, and we're already seeing some pushback from schools. But where we are right now is that most school districts in Texas always should and are required to honor and respect students' names and pronouns. It gets a bit trickier where there's some disagreement between a parent or guardian and their student. And I think that's really the main area that the anti-LGBT groups are pushing on for attack, but especially where a student and a parent both are supportive of that student's pronouns and name, school districts almost always have been required to follow that. And the next section is bullying and harassment. All school districts in Texas, as well as the state of Texas, have very strong protections for students being bullied or harassed. I mentioned gender-based harassment. Right now, every single Texas school district has a policy prohibiting harassment based on gender, and those policies include any harassment based on someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. So there are some very robust protections. Unfortunately, this is one of those areas where what someone's rights are on paper often are not always what they experience at school. We know that bullying and harassment are rampant. We know that even if someone has a really good policy, it's really tough to find supportive teachers and educators to actually really protect that student. And so it's an area we're still working on, but the rights themselves are very robust. Students also have a right to form gender and sexuality alliances, or GSAs. And this is another right that unfortunately we're seeing some attacks against. I think a lot of the anti-LGBT groups that are coming after GSAs don't realize that the Equal Access Act, which is an act of Congress, which was originally passed to really protect religious clubs. So all of those Christian alliances and schools, the same reason that they are allowed to be in school is under the First Amendment and the Equal Access Act. And those same rights protect GSA's ability to be in schools. So the rights are very robust and very well protected, but we still see some attacks on GSAs, and particularly in usually smaller, more rural communities, they don't understand that GSAs are robustly protected based on the right to free religion as well under the First Amendment. And the one other area where we're seeing a lot of backlash is free speech and censorship. That, as you all have, I'm sure have seen, it's perplexing how much that they are trying to ban LGBT literature, prohibit LGBT students from expressing who they are. And this is an area that we and other groups are very much working on. And I think ultimately is going to, the other side, I think it does give me some hope that, that these ideas, that they're losing the battle over the ideas themselves, and that their only way is they're attempting to ban the books. But of course, if you've ever met a young person, or if you're a teenager yourself, you know that the harder that adults try to keep something away from you, the more likely you are to actually try to read it or access it. And we've seen some amazing youth organizing where young people themselves are distributing books to their friends, starting book clubs, pushing back. And the legal rights themselves under the First Amendment are still very robust. So there are legal options if your school is trying to ban who you are or prohibit your free speech. We're going to talk next about some of the tools for supporting LGBT students. So that was a quick summary of the rights you have. But of course, if you have a right but you're not able to actually implement it or live it and be your true and authentic self, it's really not worth that much. But there are 3 steps we're going to talk about. The first one is going to be informal negotiations. We always recommend trying to resolve things informally first. And on the next slide, it talks about how if you can find any kind of ally or someone at school to support you, whether it's a principal, a superintendent, or any other counselor, try to find someone on your side. So it's not just you alone advocating for something, but finding someone who's friendly, trying to get things in writing whenever you can. If you're talking to a principal, sending an email can be helpful. But sometimes you do hit a brick wall. And so the next slide talks about filing a formal complaint. Every public school district in Texas has a complaint process. These processes are required by law, and they give students and parents an opportunity to complain about any kind of discrimination or harassment. This is a little bit separate from a bullying complaint, so you also have a right to file any kind of bullying complaint if that's happening to you. What you should know about the general complaint process is that the deadlines are very tight. So you typically have about 3 weeks, sometimes only 2 weeks, to file a complaint after the date that something happened to you. So for example, if I am denied access to the bathroom and it's a one-time thing, I have 2 or 3 weeks to file a complaint if I want to take advantage of the complaint process. The good thing about the complaint process is that they're required by their own rules to get back to you in writing and to give you a hearing. We have a toolkit, the txtranskids.org toolkit talks in detail about how to go about this complaint process. And of course, we at ACLU and Lambda Legal are also happy to talk with you and to give you advice and even sometimes help directly through these complaints. The next slide talks also about the federal civil rights complaints. And these are the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights has the power and responsibility to enforce Title IX, which prohibits any kind of discrimination or harassment based on sex, which the courts have interpreted to include sexual orientation and gender identity. The one downside of OCR, as it's known, is that they tend to be very slow, but they have expressed a great willingness to investigate any claims of discrimination or harassment against LGBT students. And the Department of Justice also has the power to investigate through their Civil Rights Division. If your rights have been violated, try to stay calm and stay safe. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Unfortunately, we've seen some students staying home from school, seeking mental health help. Don't put yourself in an unsafe situation. Try not to disobey or resist, what the principal or others are telling you. Try to get things in writing when you can, or even record. So Texas generally is a one-party recording state. So if you are a party to a conversation, you can record it, even if you're not telling the other side. So if the principal or someone calls you, you are able to record that conversation. Of course, if you're on school camp property, depending on what the rules are for using your cell phone, if you're a student, you could potentially get in trouble for using your cell phone. But generally in Texas, you have a right to record if you are part of the conversation. If you're not part of the conversation, that could be considered wiretapping, and I would avoid doing that. And get support, contact us if you need help, and look at the toolkit to have a deeper dive into what your rights are. That, I think, concludes my section, but looking forward to taking any questions later on.
You're muted.
Thank you, Brian. I know every time. Hi, everybody. My name is Adri Perez, and I'm talking to a muted mic. But now we're going to cover some calls to action, starting with Chloe with Equality Texas.
Hi, all. So we have what is called our statewide rapid response team. And we're inviting everyone to join it. Basically, you are the first ones to know about shenanigans that are going on. Once we have the news, you get the news. And we often mobilize this response team across Texas to respond to issues either at the state level or at the local level. And so we're going to share the link with y'all, and I highly encourage all of y'all to join because we're not going to get anything done unless we get people to show up. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Chloe. Emerald.
Hi, y'all. So here with Texas Freedom Network, talk a little bit about the Teach the Truth Coalition. So we launched this coalition in response to the growing right-wing movement that has been, censoring classroom discussions and banning books that target LGBTQ+ folks and the voices of people of color. So together, like I said, we built this coalition because we want to ensure that Texas students receive a quality education that is honest and it's accurate and it's reflective of the Texas students that are in our public school system. So yeah, we've been fighting back at the State Board of Education. We've been fighting back at the local school district level, fighting against these transphobic policies and book bans that, like I said before, target LGBTQ+ folks. So if you find yourself or your community directly or indirectly affected by these issues, feel free to contact me. I'll drop my information right now, but feel free to contact us so that you can learn how you can plug into this organizing work. And to learn more about how you can get involved, you can visit our website at tfn.org, Teach the Truth. Let me go ahead and drop it in the chat because it's pretty lengthy. But if you want, like I said, if you want to learn how to organize your community or the State Board of Education to fight back against all this stuff that's going on, please feel free to join our movement. And we couldn't be any more grateful for you all and all the great activists out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Emerald and Chloe. And lastly, the link that we always share is on our texastranskids.org website that we've been dropping into the chat routinely. On that same site, you can sign up to be an advocate. And by doing so, you give your information to all of the wonderful organizations that have joined us today so that we can contact you and engage you when there is a rapid response action, when there's something happening in schools regarding book bans or censorship, and when the governor decides to issue a statewide directive. So please sign up there and be sure to get all of the updates from all of the wonderful organizations that are here today and the Transgender Education Network of Texas, which did not join us today, but also part of our wonderful coalition. Next up, all of our partners are going to come on camera and we're going to answer some questions for members in our audience. So one of the first questions that we got was if we are going to be sharing the presentation and the slides just to answer out loud. The answer for that is yes. We are also going to be sharing this recording, and in order to preserve some anonymity for the question section of this presentation, we are going to stop it right now.